move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move it.
Welcome to another episode of I Like to Move It, the Rulmeca podcast, where we discuss the most relevant and interesting topics related to material handling world. Today we have a fascinating topic to explore. The world needs to reduce carbon emissions and transition energy use away from fossil fuels. What is the impact on commodity demand? I'm your host, Mr. R, and today we are lucky enough to talk about this topic with a guest we know well, Tim Clark. Hello Tim, welcome back.
Thanks, Mr. R.
Well Tim, in previous episodes we have been discussing commodity cycles. Please give us a quick recap, introducing today's topic about energy transition and its impact on commodity demand.
Just a reminder for everybody, we think of the commodity cycle in sort of three major categories. Economic cycles, the topic of our first episode. Developmental cycles, which is all about urbanization and industrialization, the topic of our second episode. And then technical cycles, which includes energy transition, and it's the topic of today's cycle. So where are we in the cycle? In summary, we're probably at a sort of slightly weak point right now with recessionary risks on the economic cycle, but with a more positive outlook going into the second half of this year as the dollar weakens going through the year. China, from a developmental cycle, is also sort of at peak levels, but demand is very strong and mining companies are struggling to keep up with the level of demand currently. So although GDP growth is slowing, ultimate commodity demand remains slightly plateaued, but at high levels. All sounds quite poor for commodities. Those first two cycles are not particularly bullish trends. But what I think we do need to recognize is that we're in the very emerging stages of an energy transition cycle where we move from reliance on fossil fuels towards renewable and low carbon intensive technologies and sources of power. And that's going to require a major rejig to all of our economies, and it's a global cycle, and it's going to have very significant demand. But most importantly, just to use an analogy, it's a little bit like running an ultra marathon after completing one last weekend. We've just completed the biggest, fastest, most significant super cycle in history. The cupboards are empty in terms of resources and reserves and miners' abilities to respond to demand. And yet, energy transition is upon us and demand is going to be very strong.
Many people think of energy transition as buying an electric car. What is the reality?
Battery electric vehicles are the closest thing that a consumer sees from energy transition. But the truth is that energy transition is much wider and more broad-ranging. The need to move away from fossil fuels affects transportation globally, shipping, rail. It affects industrial activities and uses. And it also very primarily affects electricity generation themselves, which goes into the electrons produced to run that battery electric vehicle or those battery fleets. Just an example perhaps to share, just to make it more direct for people. Personal transport moving to battery electric vehicles is a positive trend and advancing fast thanks to regulation led by Europe and followed globally. Did you know though that when you buy a battery electric vehicle, on average you need to drive 100,000 kilometers to break even on the higher carbon intensity of production of that battery electric vehicle compared to driving a combustion engine vehicle? And that's because the metal that goes into your battery electric vehicle, aluminium, nickel, cobalt, steel, that also needs to be green. And thus we need to and the electrons that go into your battery electric vehicles also need to come from renewable sources. And what we wanted to try and emphasize to you is that electrification requires a very significant broadening of energy transition, not just in battery electric vehicles. A couple of the big mining companies that I speak to have illustrated to me that a multiple of their current electricity use will go up by a multiple around about between 3 and 5 times as they electrify their mining fleet, their rail fleets, and their processes. So we're going to need to produce a whole lot more electricity, move it from different areas, so new grids, and we're going to have to green out the production of materials that go into feedstocks for consumer durable goods. It's a gigantic challenge. It's highly commodity intensive. It's a global phenomenon, and I think it's likely to herald a very significant commodity super cycle, which we call the energy transition cycle.
And what about batteries?
Battery chemistries are also changing a lot. We've seen huge volatility in the prices of some of the battery feedstock materials like lithium, cobalt, nickel. There's also a lot of uncertainty around the emergence of a hydrogen economy, fuel cells and PGM demand. So it's very clear to us that all of these materials are going to be required, but betting exactly on which one is going to be required at different times and the different extents is going to be somewhat more challenging. Perhaps a basket is more sensible. There are supply constraints all around the world, and hence investment is being put in place in R&D to thrift away from materials that are based in jurisdictions with higher risks, or alternatively where the certainty of supply of the materials, given technological constraints, is in place. I think one thing that is absolutely clear, and that is renewables are not going to work without storage. The grids are going to need consistent power over time, and so my sense is that a combination of all of these materials is going to be needed to satisfy the world's energy demand. Perhaps a basket is the best way forward. Betting on absolute winners and losers may be more risky. If I had to put my head on a block and choose, say, 2 commodities that I think are going to be winners from this process, I'm pretty certain that copper is needed in all electrification, and aluminium is light and strong and also transmits electrons on long distances, and hence is a good substitute for copper if copper prices go too high. And so if I had to put my head on a block and choose 2, I'd choose copper and aluminium.
You are outlining a bullish view of demand. Can supply keep up?
I'm privileged to be able to spend time every year with the CEOs of some of the very largest mining companies in the world. And what's become categorically clear over the last few years is that it's becoming significantly harder. Communities are requiring significant amounts more interaction and involvement. Timetables of licensing and approvals through communities are rising. Mining companies can't build a mine that emits carbon, so in order to build a mine now, you need a renewable farm of some sort. Mining companies can't build a mine nowadays using groundwater. It's generally under constraint, and so that requires desalination. Desalination requires power, so that again requires more power. And all of these things are overarched with a world economy with a north-south divide, where resources generally are sitting more in the southern hemisphere of the world, and where these governments are facing fiscal constraints and looking to increase their rent paid. Communities are facing a lack of jobs and looking to increase their share of the benefit of the resources from which are in and around their communities. So at the end of the day, it seems clear to me that energy transition cannot come fast enough for the world. But the truth is, there are real constraints to us living the life we live and decarbonizing on the set timetables we've set. Miners are investing in new technologies to satisfy the demand, but commodities, regulators, governments, communities are all demanding and taking more. The race is going to be very hard to win, but commodity prices and investment should be supported for many, many years to come as the energy transition cycle continues to gain momentum.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing with us your view of the demand and the challenges that the supply faces in the mining sector. It was a pleasure to listen to your analysis and your experiences on the ground. I'm sure that our listeners appreciated your presence in this podcast very much. We wish you all the best for your future projects and hope to have you back as a guest soon. For now, we say goodbye to Tim and thank you for following us. See you in the next episode.
I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to